Okay, first of all, thank you for what you do. I am very honored to be here, and you guys are very special. By the way, how many of you have served in our U.S. Army, Marines, Coast Guard, Navy, or Air Force? Raise your hands, please. Thank you very much for your service. Hua, thank you. All right, let's talk about leadership. You know, I just finished a book on the American Revolution, Liberty and Leadership. It's really a wonderful study. Writing a book is a journey, and it was just really exciting. And when I was studying the American Revolution, I realized how blessed we are as Americans to live in such a great country that has liberty. And I studied the French Revolution also, just to get a sort of a juxtaposition of the two revolutions. It's really interesting to see the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The American Revolution lasted 8 years and actually carried on after, and wasn't really finally codified until the War of 1812, if you want to look at it from a larger historical perspective. So it was a long struggle, and it ended in liberty and a republic. The French Revolution, on the other hand, started with great ideas. They wanted liberty, equality, fraternity, but they ended up with the guillotine. And one of the stories I want to tell you about this is interesting. As you know, the French Revolution had a period called the Reign of Terror where the guillotine was chopping off heads, 20, 30, 40 heads a day. There was this one day when they had 3 important members that they wanted to behead. One was a priest, one was a lawyer, and one was an engineer who was responsible for all the fire departments in Paris. So the priest got up, and they were shouting and screaming at him and throwing cabbages and rotten tomatoes and garbage, and everybody saying, "Kill the priest, down with the priest, God is dead, kill the priest." And the priest gets up there very quietly and says, "May I say a few words before I die?" And they say, "Go ahead, but it won't make a difference." So the priest gets up and says, "God, please forgive them. They know not what they do. I have no malice in my heart for them. Please forgive these people." They bring him over there. They put his head underneath the guillotine. They get ready to put him there. He looks up. All the people are screaming at him. The executioner gets the signal, drops the rope, boom! The thing comes down, bang! Stops. Half an inch from his neck. Oh my God, they can't believe this. So they pull him up, they pull him out, the crowd's just aghast, and they say, let him live, it's a sign from God. So they let the priest go. Then they bring the lawyer up. The lawyer. Kill the lawyer, rotten lawyer, no good lawyer. They bring the lawyer up, and the lawyer goes, "Hey, can I say a few words?" And they say, "Go ahead, you can say a few words, but don't try anything tricky here." He says, "O muse of justice, O great goddess of justice, please understand that I am an innocent man. Show me mercy today and justice for all these people. To heck with the lawyer, kill him, put him down." So they take him and they put him on the guillotine, and he gets down there, and the executioner gets a signal, and he drops the rope, bang, and the blade goes boom! Half an inch from his neck, it stops. Oh my gosh, the crowd goes, "You can't believe this." Again, twice in one day, this is another miracle. Let him live, let him live. So they let the lawyer live. And finally, they got the chief of engineers, who was responsible for all the fire departments in Paris. And they bring him up, and they say, "You're next, and this time we're going to make sure this works." And he goes, "Yeah, you know, it'd probably work better if you took the knot out of that rope." Sometimes you have to know when to be quiet. So I know that I'm the only thing between you and the end of this conference. So I'll do my best to not only give you some good information, but hopefully at the end of this, you'll be able to get out of here on time. Okay, so let's talk about leadership. And let's talk about raising your leadership quotient. This is very important. Everything that you do in life is about your level of leadership. And leadership is the art of influence. It is about influencing people to get things done. was an interesting thing. On the internet today, there's a visual word dictionary. You can go to this and put in any word, and it will give you other words that are close to that word or have some connection to that word. It's an interesting experience to go through and look at some words because you can learn more about their meanings and you can learn more about the subtleties of their meanings. When I put leadership into this, this is what came up. Status, position, leader, power, ability, leaders, and leading. Now remember that. That's interesting. That's sort of the common idea of leadership. Now, everything you do in life, absolutely everything you do in life, is impacted by your leadership, and you will rise to the level of your leadership. Think about it. In your family, your ability to lead that family, well or ill, the way you do it makes a difference. Your family is successful, and you are successful if you are a better leader. Your community, your job, all of these things require leadership, unless you work with no other people and interact with no other people. And I can't think of a job that does that. Even computer programmers in the software company that I work with have to interact with other people. So their level of leadership determines their level of success and happiness in many cases. So what I would like to do is talk to you today about 7 secrets of leadership. And when you talk to your folks about leadership, there's some interesting things that you can do. For instance, how many of you teach leadership to your teams? Raise your hand. Okay, you probably teach daily by example, right? Do you have formal courses? Who has a formal course on leadership? Interesting, not very many. 1 or 2 hands showed up. If leadership is so important, what do you do to teach leadership to your team members and to learn from your team members about leadership? Now, what can you do? For instance, a simple thing you can do is you can have a leadership lunch. Every week, I have a leadership lunch with my team, and we take a book, we read a book on leadership, we read 1 chapter each time, we read that chapter, and then we discuss leadership, and I provide them lunch. So they get a lunch, and you could brown bag this. You don't have to pay for their lunch. But you get together, and you talk about leadership, and you discuss it. This helps raise not only your individual leadership quotient by studying and thinking about leadership, but it also raises your team leadership IQ. Because it's really important that the team understand leadership and understand the roles of leadership in getting things done and getting things done properly. Now, the best thing that I can offer to you is, when you discuss leadership, tell stories. Most people don't want to see lists of values. Most people don't want to talk about philosophy, but they love hearing about stories. So I'm going to give you 7 secrets today about leadership. Now, you can't tell anybody these secrets. No, you can. Go ahead and tell them. In fact, I want you to tell them these secrets. Most of these secrets you know, but for some reason, many people and many leaders don't seem to remember them when they're leading. So we'll talk about these 7 secrets in 7 different stories. First, these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Thomas Paine. Let me take you back in time to tell you this story. In 1775, the Americans decided they wanted to be free of Great Britain. The British marched on Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world occurred. We realized that they were going to compel us by force to disarm and to obey all their laws without representation. And for Americans, this was tyranny. So an army assembled, a leaderless army, and it sieged the British in Boston. And the British were outnumbered about 7 to 1. Even though the Americans were not trained soldiers, the regiment in Boston was surrounded. And this was, again, 1775. General George Washington was appointed to be the commander-in-chief. He arrives in July of 1775. He sees an army that is not much more than a mob, a bunch of militias. He brings them together, he appoints leaders, he starts training, he does everything he can to get this army organized, but it's a tough situation because the British are the best army in the world. However, they're still sieged in Boston. Now, through some really smart moves and some clever use of subordinate leaders, he gets cannon from Ticonderoga. They move 350 miles on sleds, these cannons down from Fort Ticonderoga. He's able to put them on Dorchester Heights, and with only enough rounds, enough ammunition to fire 2 rounds per gun, he bluffs the British out of Boston, and they surrender Boston without burning it, and the British Army leaves, and there are no more British soldiers in America. And this is now 1776, in March of 1776. What a wonderful thing. America's won its liberty. Well, guess what? The British are coming back, and they're coming back with a vengeance. Now, as you know, in July of 1776, we declare independence. Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia decides that the United States ought to be free. And so we become an independent nation. This, of course, enrages King George. The British are coming back with the largest armada they ever created, the biggest force that they ever had up until D-Day, June 1944, largest invasion fleet the British had ever mustered. Their ships arrive with thousands of soldiers and some of the meanest mercenary soldiers on earth called Hessians. These Hessians were German mercenaries who fought for the King of England. And when they engage Washington's men in New York, Washington is beaten in every battle. No matter what he does, no matter how hard he tries, his young army, which doesn't know how to fight, is overmatched, outwitted, and outflanked by the professional British soldiers and German mercenaries. Washington's army, which started off about 40,000 men in Boston, even more if you count some of the militias who were in the area, is dwindling. He loses in New York. He loses important forts in New York and New Jersey. He's driven through New Jersey, and in December of 1776, only a few months after the Declaration of Independence, the United States Army is down to 1,000-some men. Washington has 1,800 soldiers, some of them as young as 14 years old. What were you doing when you were 14? Some of these guys got their shoes in July, but have been marching so much that they don't have shoes anymore because shoes just wear away. We can't imagine shoes wearing away. I assure you, you march enough and your boots wear out. When I was in Ranger School, I had to carry an extra pair of boots in my rucksack, and I actually wore out boots that I had to put new boots on. These guys didn't have a second pair of boots. So Washington is now in December in New Jersey trying to escape from the British Army as they are chasing him, trying to cut his men down and finish the revolution. With his 1,800 guys and a few other hundred from different elements that are led by 2 other generals, he's able to cross the Delaware River and get into Pennsylvania. He takes all the boats that he can find in December along the Delaware coast, and Delaware River, on both coast of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and brings those boats in so the British can't easily cross that river. And then he pulls his men into camp and waits for some of the other folks to show up. He's hoping that the army will coalesce where he is in Pennsylvania so that he can then decide what his next move is. General Howe, the British commander, says, "We've got the fox. He's going to be completely outgunned when we fight him. We're going to win this battle. We don't have to rush. Send your men into winter quarters. And you Hessians, under a guy named Colonel Rahl, I want you to go to a place called Trenton. And I want you to set your guys up in Trenton. You're 1,500 mercenary soldiers with the best weapons, the best cannon, and the best, most fiercely trained and drilled force in the entire world." Washington's 1,800 men in Pennsylvania form up a camp, gather their weapons, and Washington has to decide what to do. Now, many of you know this story. Some of you have seen the picture of Washington crossing the Delaware that we all like to look at, standing on the boat with the flag and all. That was actually a very heroic painting that was painted in the 1850s. This is probably more of what it looked like. So General George Washington knows that the entire revolution is at stake. The Congress, which is in Philadelphia, has fled. They send Washington a letter. They say, good luck, you're in charge. 1,800 men, many of them 14, 15, 16-year-old lads, some of them as old as 60. One of the generals shows up a couple days before Christmas, General Gates. General Gates was trained in the British Army. He brings with him 800 men. General Washington has a meeting and says, General Gates, tomorrow is Christmas. I intend to form the army, cross the Delaware River at night, and attack the Hessians at Trenton the day after Christmas. What do you think of my plan? Gates, who's just got back from escaping the British lines with his 800 men, again, who is a trained professional soldier who was trained by the British, says, you would not like to know what I think. Washington says, please, sir, tell me. He says, you're a fool. You can't win, so you seek annihilation. You're no soldier. Your men are no soldiers. Now, any reasonable man, any reasonable leader would have looked at that situation and said, that guy's right. We don't stand a chance. But Washington was an unreasonable man. And God bless him, he was unreasonable for us. He said, General Gates, that's exactly why we're going to win. Because they're not going to be ready for us. And Alexander Hamilton, I want you to put your gun on General Gates and drive him out of this camp. Don't let him see any of his men, but he's leaving. And Alexander Hamilton takes Gates away. Gates runs off to find Congress someplace in Boston. And Washington sets up the plan and the attack, and he gets his trusted officers together, leaders that he's been training for months. Henry Knox, Colonel Glover, who's in charge of the river crossing, Nathaniel Greene. These are all people that you should know about because they are American leaders that created our republic. And he gets his small band of forces onto these barges. They're called Durham boats. They were carrying coal. They were used by a company that would ferry coal back and forth across the river. And the reason they're standing in the boats is because there's water in the bottom of them. They're barely afloat. They carry about 18 to 20 men each, depending on the size. Some are bigger. And they get across that river. Now, his plan is to cross that river by midnight, assemble the army, march the 8 miles to Trenton, and hit the Hessians before they wake up. Now, he believes that they're going to have had a great party on Christmas, so he's hoping that they will be relaxed and not ready when he attacks. What he doesn't know is that Colonel Joachim Rahl, the Hessian commander of the Hessians at Trenton, is a stern disciplinarian. He has his men up every morning at stand to in formation with their weapons ready to fight. Every morning. Washington starts crossing the Delaware. Boat after boat makes the trip back and forth in the cold and one of the worst winters they've seen. Huge chunks of ice. The snow is coming down. The rain and sleet is coming down intermittent. It's coming down straight. It's coming down slanted. It's coming down fierce. He plans 2 other attacks, one to the north and one to the south of him. Both will cross the river so they can go around Trenton and completely surround Trenton. Both of those attacks, north and south, can't get across the river. Only Washington can get across the river because at his point, the water is passable. Throughout the night, he conducts the night river crossing. Soldier after soldier after soldier gets in the barge, and they have weapons called muskets. If any of you have ever fired a musket, you know that a flint firing musket, one that fires with a flint for its source of ignition, has a pan with powder in it. You know the term flash in the pan? That means that flash in the pan means that it's flashed and it didn't set off the weapon. Well, what's worse is when there's no flash at all. Because if the pan powder is wet, then the gun won't fire. The musket will not ignite. His men are crossing this river in the sleet, in the rain, in the snow. They get on the other side, they put some fires together, they huddle together as best they can because the weather is absolutely freezing. 2 men die of hypothermia on the far side. Washington gets word that the river crossing is taking too long. They will not cross by midnight. They'll be lucky to get across, everyone, including the cannon, which he needs, by 3 in the morning. Washington says, carry on. They continue the crossing. At 3 in the morning, the army's assembled. At about 4 in the morning, they're about ready to go. He starts to move the army out. Nathaniel Greene, one of his generals, a stalwart man, young officer, says, sir, the powder's all wet. No one will be able to shoot. Only a few muskets will be able to fire. Washington says, we'll use the bayonet. He's determined. They start the march. They come to Jacobs Creek. No big deal. It's a creek. Unfortunately, the weather is so bad that this creek is 6 foot down straight ice, a little ditch, and 6 foot up straight ice. And he's got cannon, and there's no bridge. Henry Knox, his capable and determined artillery commander, comes to him and says, General, I can't get the cannon across this creek. Washington says, Henry, cross the creek. Knox takes the cannon apart, lowers them down the ditch on ropes, pulls them up the ditch on ropes, gets them to the other side. They're delayed even further. The sun is rising. The Hessians will be ready. Washington moves his army forward. As he's getting ready, getting closer to Trenton, a militia captain with an outrider, 2 riders and himself, shows up. A New Jersey militiaman, a captain. He says, George Washington, General Washington, great to see you. You should have seen what we did to those guys last night. We shot them up. Washington's face goes white. He goes, what? He's planning on a surprise attack. He says, yeah, a couple of my boys, we found one of those Hessian camps and we shot at them. Killed 1 or 2 of them, we think. Washington says, sir, I think you've ruined us, because now the Hessians will be ready. Greene looks at Washington and says, what do we do? Washington says, victory or death. We go forward. The army continues to move. They arrive at Trenton. The Hessians are not up. That militia captain had gone out on Christmas night, raised havoc. Rahl had assembled all his men, had been out most of the night looking for them, came back at 4 in the morning and said, to heck with this, nobody would attack in this weather, go to bed. Washington moves in. Sullivan takes one of the forces around, one of his generals, to one of the roads so they can hit Trenton from one side. Washington hits it from the other. 8 in the morning, the attack begins, and the Hessians are still asleep. The powder in their guns is mostly wet. The Americans attack with the bayonet. The whole battle lasts about 90 minutes. Henry Knox's cannon, which were vital, were the only thing that could really fire, and they bring firepower to the battle and win. Colonel Rahl, the Hessian commander, is shot by a musket ball by an ingenious young American soldier about 19 years old who waxed his flash pan. The little pan on top of the powder, he waxed it so it would stay dry, and he opened it up, and he fired and shot Rahl in the chest. And at the same time, another soldier who had done the same thing, because several of the Pennsylvanians had done this, Rahl got hit twice, fell off his horse. The Hessians surrendered. Washington loses not a single man, only the 2 that died of hypothermia. About 22 Hessians are killed, 80 are wounded badly, and over 900 prisoners. He saves the revolution. The day after Christmas, 1776. So when you have Christmas the next time with your team or your family, you tell them a Christmas story like that. And then they'll understand why leadership's important and why we're blessed to be Americans. So, the first secret of leadership is that fear is a reaction and courage is a decision. Leaders decide on courage. It is the fundamental principle. It makes all the difference. Leaders choose courage. And you know this because you face it. It's the fundamental requirement of leadership. Without courage, you cannot lead. It takes courage to stand up in front of your team. It takes courage to shoulder responsibility. Courage is the first secret. Secret number 2. Who is this guy? Somebody must have seen this before, right? This is Aristotle. Who is Aristotle the teacher of? Anyone know? Some minor Greek guy who conquered the world, Alexander the Great. Aristotle was his teacher. What's interesting about Alexander the Great is that his leadership is tremendous. What he did and how he inspired his soldiers and how he inspired people to form a completely new organization, a kingdom, an empire under his command, was largely because of his personal leadership and, I believe, largely because of lessons he learned from Aristotle. And that lesson is this. So write that down. But you know this lesson. You know this lesson because your parents probably taught you this lesson. And if you didn't, you learned this lesson certainly the first time you had to be a leader. And it is basically this. You must learn to obey before you can be a good commander. Now, if you understand the Greek a bit better, what it really means is this. You must be a good follower before you can learn to be a good leader. Now, there's a lot in that statement. First of all, what kind of person do you want on your team? The whining, complaining, it can't be done, always arguing with you kind of guy? Or the person who says, okay, I understand that. I'll debate the issues with you, but if you say that's what we're going to do, by God, we're going to get it done. Well, most of us want that kind of guy, that kind of gal on our team. So being a good follower is really important because it involves selflessness. All of us are followers. We all follow someone. We have to give up of ourselves something, our time, our energy, part of our life. Maybe our lives in the sense of what you do as firefighters and first responders and what soldiers do and policemen. So being a good follower is a prerequisite to being a good leader and to learning how to lead. Because if you learn selflessness, then you can be a leader. If you never learn selflessness, you may lead, but you'll be one of those leaders that has his ladder climbing of success up against the wrong wall. And eventually, that will come back home to change your organization and bring you failure, or at least not success in the way that you could if you understood selflessness. So, selflessness is a vital component of being a good follower and being a good leader, and you learn it by being a good follower. So all of us need to be better followers. Think about how many times your boss, your superior leader, your leader, needed your help. If you are there to be the person that's a good follower to help him or her, he'll never forget that. They'll never forget that. You'll get the mission accomplished much better. When things get tough, that's when people start arguing and falling apart. Being a good follower makes all the difference. It doesn't mean blind obedience, but it means being a good follower, understanding how to support the mission and get the intent accomplished. And here's a quote by D. Hawk, who was CEO. He said, "If you don't understand that you work for your mislabeled subordinates, meaning they're not subordinate, then you know nothing of leadership. You only know tyranny." All of us have worked under tyrants at one point in our lives. Learn from that. Teach your team about followership, and they'll learn to be good leaders. And they learn best by watching you. So if you say, oh, those guys at platoon headquarters are all screwed up, they don't know anything, all the time, then they will say the same thing. If you act that way, they will act that way. Okay, let me tell you about the third secret of leadership. This guy, Joshua Chamberlain. Now, I just told you about George Washington and how he saved the Republic. There would be no America without George Washington, period. This guy also saved the Republic, and many of you don't even know who he is. Joshua Chamberlain was a professor at Bowdoin College in Maine. He was a professor during the Civil War who said, I'm going to enlist and join the Army and serve because I believe in our cause. And he left his cushy job and joined a regiment, and was quickly, because of his education and his natural leadership ability, was elected to be an officer, because that's how they did it then. They elected you. And then he started to lead properly, and he made it to lieutenant colonel. He fought at several battles. At Fredericksburg, he was the second in command of a regiment, the 2nd Maine. And at Fredericksburg, the Union Army charged across the river, up a hill, directly into Confederate fire, wave upon wave upon wave, and they melted like snow in the summer to the awesome, accurate fire of the Confederates on the top of the hill, holding the stone wall. The courage was amazing, but futile. The battlefield was littered with dead, and Joshua Chamberlain survived. He pulled out of that, and the Army began to go to other missions. And in July of 1863, they were moving north into Pennsylvania because Robert E. Lee had decided to go north into Pennsylvania and bring the entire Confederate Army there so that he could swing through Pennsylvania and possibly come down onto Washington, D.C. And if he did that and beat the Union armies on the way, the Confederacy would have won the war. So, in July of 1863, a battle started at a place called Gettysburg. When the battle started, the 2nd Maine was moving toward the battle. They weren't there yet. The day before the battle, a captain, Pennsylvania captain, came up to Joshua Chamberlain. The regiment had started with 2,000 men from Maine. In July, they had 172 left. Most had died at Fredericksburg and other battles. So it wasn't much of a regiment. This captain from Pennsylvania came up leading 102 prisoners. And these guys were from another Maine regiment. And Joshua Chamberlain, and 20th Maine, I'm sorry, not the 2nd Maine. These guys were of the 2nd Maine. Joshua Chamberlain commanded the 20th Maine. And these guys from the 2nd Maine had signed up their enlistments for 2 years, when the rest of the regiment had only signed up for 1. So when the rest of their 2nd Maine regiment had said their enlistments were up and they went home, these guys felt like they should have gone home too. The Corps commander disagreed, had them all arrested as mutineers. The Pennsylvania captain who was leading these guys had been marching them for 2 days without food and water. They had disarmed them. They were in uniform, but no guns. He brought them up to Joshua Chamberlain of the 20th Maine and said, they're yours. They're mutineers. You can shoot them if you want to. Now, Chamberlain only had 100-some guys. There were more mutineers than he had. So the question was, what does he do? The neat thing about Chamberlain was that he understood human beings, and he knew that merit matters and that the individual counts. So he pulled these guys down, had them sit down under a tree, and he talked to them and said, here's the story. I don't know what happened to you, and I don't know why this occurred. But first we're going to let you get some food and water, and then I'm going to talk with you. So he fed them, gave them some water, and after they'd eaten their meal, he came over and talked to them, and he said, okay, We're heading to a big fight. This could decide the fate of the war. The reason that we're fighting is important. We're fighting for liberty. We're fighting to set people free. We're fighting for a better future. It's not the land. There's always more land. It's not money. We're not fighting for anything but freedom. And if you join me and pick up the rifle, I'd personally appreciate it. All but 4 did. So now his force is twice as strong. They march toward Gettysburg, and as soon as they get there, they're thrown into the fight. A general comes up to him and says, "You must hold the left flank. Get to that hill, hold the left flank. There's nobody else. You're the last to arrive. You must hold the left flank of this battlefield. If we lose the left flank, if we lose this hill, the Confederates will come around, get behind us, and destroy the army." Chamberlain says, "I understand." He goes to a place called Little Round Top. They set up there, and sure enough, here comes John Bell Hood, Confederate general, and he is determined. And his regiments are charging up that hill, wave after wave after wave, screaming the rebel yell, shooting, marching all the way up to the top, fighting to within inches of hand-to-hand combat. 10 times they go back and forth in different fights. Joshua Chamberlain's men are now out of ammunition. They can't hold any more. He's at the top. He's taken wounded. The hill is full of dead. His command sergeant major comes up to him and says, "Sir, what are we going to do? We're out of ammo." He says, "Fix bayonets. When the Confederates come this next time, we're going to charge. We'll swing down this hill, and we'll pull this left side of us, swinging like a door, and we'll sweep them off the hill. And they'll be so fast and so surprised, they won't know what hit them." And his officers look at him like he is from Mars. "You've got to be kidding me. We have no ammunition, and you want us to attack a force that outnumbers us 2 or 3 to 1 with the bayonet?" And that's exactly what they did. The Confederates came up the hill. Chamberlain shouts, "Bayonet!" They all fix bayonets. He tells the bugler to blow the charge, and they charge down that hill. And he sweeps the Confederates off the hill, and they are so surprised and so overwhelmed by this overwhelming rush of madmen charging down, screaming from the top of the hill, they think it must be a huge attack, because only an idiot would attack with so few men. And he saves Little Round Top. And within about 20 minutes, more Union forces show up, and Little Round Top is secured. Had he decided to withdraw, had he pulled off that hill, the Confederates would have taken the hill, put cannon up there, moved around. The Battle of Gettysburg would have ended in a Confederate victory. Joshua Chamberlain. Be determined. So the secret is a leader must be determined. Never quit. Find a way or make one. Time and again, leaders are going to find themselves in situations that look unreasonable, that look impossible. Good leaders find a way or make one. Abraham Lincoln said, "Always bear in mind that your own resolution to succeed is more important than any other one thing." Okay, secret number 4. That is a picture of victory. Those guys are smiling. Let me tell you, that's at the Top Gun School of the U.S. Army, a place called the National Training Center. Every one of those guys has just beat the bad guy, and that hardly ever happened. The bad guys always beat us. Now, I was blessed to be stationed at the National Training Center, and I was the chief of staff of the bad guys for 2 years. So I fought every unit in the American Army and beat them over and over again. And it was fantastic. It was Valhalla. We had this training area the size of Delaware. I had about 250 tanks in my Russian-styled regiment. We had lasers on all of our equipment and laser designators on every one of our soldiers and equipment. So we fought these huge laser tag battles for 14 days straight, day and night. And at the end of it, we learned how to fight. We learned combined arms operations. Well, after 2 years of that, I got this phone call saying, "Hey, you're moving on to be the executive officer for the 1st Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division." These guys. And I was just in the middle. When I got that phone, I was in my BRDM, which is a Russian-style armored vehicle. And I had this shoebox telephone. Remember back in the Land Before Time when they used to have these mobile phones that were like this big? This was really amazing. So I answered this phone, and it was the Pentagon, and they said, "We've got your next assignment, whether you like it or not, and you're going to be the XO of the 1st Brigade, 1st Infantry." And I was just throwing the last artillery shells and ordering the counterattack on these guys a year before this picture was taken, or 18 months before this picture was taken. So the next day I had to show up and report to the commander and say, in my OP-4 uniform, my opposing forces Russian-style uniform, I showed up and said, "Sir, I'm going to be your XO." And he went, "The enemy. I hate you." So I said, "Great." So we started training. My job was to get them to win next time. My job was to train them so that this staff could run operations, so that this unit could win, and help that commander to be a hero in the next time he had to make this fight. And we did. And that's the proof, because they're all smiling. You can't imagine how important that is. These guys won. They beat the OP-4. That was a big, big deal. If you ever saw the movie with Tom Cruise, Top Gun, it's the same kind of thing. This was our Top Gun school, and to beat the bad guys, to beat the red guys was amazing. It didn't happen often. So remember that as a leader, your job is to teach people. Be a coach and a mentor. Jack Welch put it this way: before you're a leader, success is all about growing yourself, learning yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others. Effective leaders teach, coach, and mentor, and develop their leaders. We did leadership lunches every week. We had one day a week where we did nothing but train for the fight by writing operations orders and using constructive virtual and live simulation to train our guys. We were so focused on this fight that when we got there, we knew exactly how to do it. It was an amazing thing to watch. Secret number 5. This is another personal story. That guy standing next to me is next to my tank there, fire breather. That guy is Command Sergeant Major Ed Braze, and he is one of the greatest American soldiers you'll ever meet. And he was my Command Sergeant Major of a tank battalion on the DMZ in Korea, the demilitarized zone in Korea. Command Sergeant Majors are like God in a battalion. You do what they say. Commanders who do not listen to their Command Sergeant Majors are fools. Now, I'm pretty foolish, but we used to have this morning run. Command Sergeant Major and I would get out and run with the troops. Oftentimes we'd run on our own. We'd do a 5-mile run, and we'd visit all the troops as we were running. So we're on our morning run, and he says, "Sir, you got to make a decision." I said, "Okay, Command Sergeant Major, what's up?" "Boots, sir, boots." I was quiet for a few minutes, trying to take in boots. "So what's the problem, Command Sergeant Major?" "Well, sir, we're tankers, and we have to wear leather boots in the M1 tank. Some of these guys are wearing these damn jungle boots that are nylon. And you know what happens in an M1 tank when you get a flare back from that main gun. That flame will come out, and that'll melt your boots, and we'll have wounded people. We have to wear leather boots. They're buying these boots downtown cheap. We got to get them leather boots." I didn't say anything. I just kept running. To my left, I could feel the heat from my Command Sergeant Major. He was getting mad because I wasn't answering him. It was almost like as if, you could touch it. It was like, hot. I said, "Command Sergeant Major, I'm not going to make that decision." Oh, man, it got hotter and hotter. All I heard was grumbling and mumbling, and finally, about half a mile later, he says, "Sir, why won't you make that decision?" I said, "Command Sergeant Major, you make the decision. That's your department. I don't worry about boots. I worry about other things." So, lesson learned there from one of my great heroes in life. Don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and let them surprise you with their results. Delegate authority, and give people authority and responsibility in the right way. If they understand your intent, which is your purpose and your method and your end state, they can do almost anything in the right way. Authority and responsibility and accountability are the keys to understanding one of the techniques of leadership. If you are someone with authority but no responsibility, you are a tyrant. Because it doesn't matter what happens. You can just tell people what to do. If you have responsibility with no authority, you're a victim. So don't ever be responsible for something without some authority. And always appoint accountability. When you tell someone that you need to get something done, make sure that you tell them in clear fashion, this is the task, this is the purpose, this is the end state, and this is when you expect it. Secret number 6, TR, bully. How many of you know much about Teddy Roosevelt? He is an interesting character. He is, particularly in this moment in time when he was the executive officer of the 1st American Volunteer Cavalry in 1898 in the Spanish-American War, he was a force of nature, an unbelievable leader who inspired a regiment of guys. You may have heard of the Rough Riders. His regiment was called the Rough Riders, and he wasn't even in command of the regiment. He was the executive officer until after they'd gotten to Spain and fought their first couple battles. His commander, Colonel Leonard Wood, was promoted to general and took command of a division. So now Roosevelt was placed in command of the regiment. And then they had this fight at a place called Kettle Hill, which was right next to San Juan Hill. Now what had happened was interesting. The American soldiers had approached Kettle Hill and were waiting for the attack on San Juan Hill and for forces on the left to move up. So the orders were, don't attack, wait. So they waited at the base of this hill. They thought they were out of range of the Spanish Mausers, but they weren't. They started taking tremendous fire from the top of the hill from the Spaniards, who had, by the way, with them German advisors who were teaching them how to use the Maxim machine gun and the cannons that were at the top of the hill. So here we are at the bottom of the hill, and Roosevelt's cavalry regiment, along with the 10th Cavalry, Buffalo Soldiers, an all-black regiment, led by a guy named John Pershing, Blackjack Pershing. These two guys, who later, by the way, becomes the commander of all U.S. forces in World War I, General Pershing. But here he's a captain. And Roosevelt and he, the 10th Cavalry and the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, are on line behind a little gully, taking tremendous fire from the Spaniards at the top of the hill. Roosevelt waits for orders. It's a confused situation. There's no radio in these days. Messages have to be sent by horseback or by bugle or by signal flags. No messages are getting through. Nothing is happening. His men are taking heavy casualties. He sees that other forces are coming up on the left toward San Juan Hill, but he can only imagine what the whole fight is. He sends a rider back. That rider gets shot. Pershing volunteers to go back himself to find out. Pershing runs back, finds General Wheeler, who's in charge of the Corps, and says, General Wheeler, can we attack? General Wheeler is kind of deranged with malaria at the time, on his horseback, got out of his sickbed to be part of the fight. He says, attack? By God, we attack. Unfortunately, he didn't know what was going on. So Blackjack Pershing comes back and says, I got orders from Wheeler to attack. Roosevelt says, let's go, up the hill. Roosevelt on his horse, and the name of his horse? Little Texas. He gets on his horse. Now everybody's being shot because these Mausers are accurate, and they're shooting right and left, and guys are falling, and he gets on a horse so everybody can see him. He's charging up the hill on the horse. He's the only one of the Rough Riders on a horse. Everybody else is running by foot. They go through the first wire. He gets off his horse. He gets on foot. He fights his way to the top of the hill. Roosevelt personally kills 3 or 4 Spaniards in the fight. The melee at the top of the hill is hand-to-hand. The machine guns are overtaken. The cannon are overtaken. The Rough Riders and the 10th Cavalry make it to the top of the hill, take Kettle Hill. Roosevelt then turns the guns from Kettle Hill onto San Juan Hill, and they machine gun the Spaniards at San Juan Hill while San Juan Hill is being attacked, and wins the fight. One of the things Roosevelt used to say is that leaders pull, bosses push. He led by example. Example is the most important form of leadership. You know this because this is how you learned as a child. This is how your children learn from you. You can say whatever you want. They'll watch what you do. Same with your team members. People ask the difference between a leader and a boss. The leader works in the open, and the boss in covert. The leader leads, and the boss drives. Don't be a boss. Lead. Secret number 7, our final story. Another soldier, George Catlett Marshall. You probably don't even know who he is. Some of you may have heard of the Marshall Plan. This guy was called the Organizer of Victory by Winston Churchill. When the United States military entered World War II, it was a very small force. In the 30s, the United States Army had only 3 combat effective divisions. The Germans invaded Poland with 39. Our army was so small and so poorly equipped, we only had 14,000 officers in the entire army. By 1945, we had 8.5 million men under arms. Huge expansion, worldwide commitments. Marshall was in charge of working with Franklin Delano Roosevelt to make that miracle of a victory happen. He coordinated with Congress. He picked personally the leaders like Eisenhower and Patton. He coordinated with generals that were already established like MacArthur. He was in charge. He was in charge of the entire war effort. Marshall, an amazing leader. And what was interesting about him was he didn't want the credit. He didn't care about the headlines. Now later on, he'd get the Nobel Peace Prize. He'd become Secretary of State. He would work out the Marshall Plan, which saved Europe from devastation and communism, because Europe had been absolutely burned to the bone. Cities were destroyed. The economy was gone. France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, Italy. These countries had nothing at the end of 1945. And he developed the plan that would use American economic might and know-how and advisors to help build their economies back up and give them pride in what they did. And also Japan, because even though we had fought a vicious war against the Japanese at the end of World War II, we took all our allies up and said, we're going to help you. Marshall was a huge part of that. He wasn't one of those guys shouting for revenge. He was a wise leader. One of the things he said is there's no limit to the good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. That's pretty good. And that's the way he was. And what this does is this kind of is said in this way. Effective leaders don't shine, they reflect. Now think about that. It's not about you, it's about the team. That's what leaders do. My officers, I used to say, it's not about you, it's not about I, it's about us. And of course we had US on our insignia. It's about US, not only us as a team, but us as a nation, us as the United States. So leaders don't shine, they reflect. So, what is leadership? This is my definition of leadership. You need to have your own definition. You're welcome to take mine. But if you don't have a definition of leadership in your brain housing group, then you should make one. Think about what leadership means to you. For me, leadership is a sacred trust. It is the art of influence. It is the ability to motivate, inspire, and impel people to get the mission accomplished. Get your team together, have them sit down over a cup of coffee or lunch and say, with a blank piece of paper, write down in one paragraph your definition of leadership. Think how hard that will be for them. Think how hard it might be for you. If you've never done that, do it. If you have a definition of leadership, that's a start point for everything. If you don't have a definition of leadership, it's some vague notion. Leadership is a sacred trust. It's the art of influence. It is the ability to motivate, inspire, and impel people to get a mission accomplished. Impel is important. I didn't say compel. I didn't say force. Impel, you have to understand the word, means to urge and to encourage, while compel means to take action as a result of pressure or coercion. Now, don't get me wrong. There are times when I look someone in the eye and I say, do it. But if I have built up trust with them, and they know my heart as a leader, and they still refuse, then I have to relieve them. Because at that point, we have to get things done. If Washington crossing the Delaware had come to the point where Henry Knox had said, "Sir, I can't take these cannon and I won't do it," Washington would have said, "Henry, I'll do it. Stand aside." Or he would have gotten someone else to do it. Impel, not compel. I'm going to leave you with another story that encapsulates all the power of leadership. I've talked about Major Zimbiak every time I have a leadership presentation because I'm so impressed with this young officer. This is a picture of him during the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq in 2004. The Battle of Fallujah was our Stalingrad. This was the fight for a city that was close quarters combat, deadly, desperate, and leadership won out. Our leadership beat their leadership. Our soldiers beat their fighters because of guys like Zimbiak. Character is your compass. It is your leadership compass. Everything that you do involving your leadership is guided by your character. He wrote a letter to his son, and this is what he said. He said, "Be a man of principle. Fight for what you believe in. Keep your word. Live with integrity. Be brave. Believe in something bigger than yourself. Serve your country. Teach, mentor, give something back to society. Lead from the front. Conquer your fears. Be a good friend. Be humble and be self-confident. Appreciate your friends and family. Be a leader and not a follower. Be valorous on the field of battle and take responsibility for your actions. Never forget those that were killed and never let rest those that killed them." He was killed in combat in Iraq after serving his 4th tour, and May 11th, 2007. But that letter to his son encapsulates what leadership is all about. So, here are my 7 secrets for you, which you are very free to tell anyone you want. First, a leader chooses courage. Second, a leader must learn to follow in order to learn to lead. Third, a leader must be determined to succeed. Fourth, a leader must teach, coach, and mentor. Fifth, a leader must delegate authority. Sixth, a leader pulls, bosses push. 7, a leader doesn't shine, but reflects. That's what I think leadership is. And if I had the opportunity to change that visual dictionary, this is what I would put for leadership. Because those values are the compass that I believe focus correct leadership, and those are the values I use for my leadership. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, personal courage, integrity, and honor. And in the end, it's all about the team and the camaraderie. There are moments in your life, if you have led correctly, that are electric. And when you stand in front of that team, and they're scared, wet, cold, hungry, and tired, but they're willing to go, it's worth more than anyone can say. It's all about the camaraderie. Well, I've got a new book out coming, 7 Leadership Lessons, Leadership, Liberty, and the American Revolution. You kind of guessed by my talk about Washington, I'm sure. And that'll be out in March. Just thought I'd mention it. And I'm willing to take any questions if we have time. Thank you. No questions? Okay, we have no questions. All right, thank you very much.